They found the logger face down in the creek. His skull was crushed, flat, pressed into the rocks like something had stepped on him and kept walking. There was no bear print. There was no boot print. There was one set of tracks in the mud, and they were the wrong shape, and they were the wrong size. The men who found him didn't wait for morning. They rode out of Portlock that day and told the rest of the village what they'd seen. Within a year, nobody was left. There is a region of Alaska that runs from Juneau in the south up to Utqiagvik on the Arctic coast and west to Anchorage. Pilots call it the Alaska Triangle. Since 1988, more than 16,000 people have vanished inside its borders. Some are hikers, some are bush pilots, some are entire families on fishing trips. Alaska has the highest per capita missing persons rate in the United States, by a margin that is not close. Most of them are never found. The smallest dot on that map, tucked into a cove on the Kenai Peninsula, is a place called Portlock. And Portlock has the worst story of any of them. Portlock wasn't always called Portlock. The original name was Port Chatham. It was a Sugpiaq village first, for thousands of years, long before the Russians arrived, long before the Americans. By the early 1900s, it had a cannery, a post office, a sawmill, and gold mining further up the creek. Fishermen worked the cove. Families lived in wood frame houses that still stand today. On paper, Portlock looked like any other small Alaskan coastal town. Then people started dying in ways that didn't make sense. The first reports were about the feeling. Men working the sawmill said something was watching them from the tree line. Kids playing near the creek said they could hear breathing in the brush when nothing was there. A hunter tracked a deer up a ridge and came back down without his rifle, pale, refusing to talk. The sound came first, heavy steps in the moss where no person was walking, a smell the old-timers described as a wet dog soaked in garbage. Then the noises at night, something that screamed like a woman from across the water, on a beach where nobody lived. The Sugpiaq name for what lived in those woods was Nantiinaq, hairy man, not a god, not a spirit, a physical thing, tall, heavy, covered in dark hair, walking on two legs. The elders had been warning about it for generations. White settlers laughed, then stopped laughing. The accounts are consistent across every decade and every witness. 8 to 9 feet tall, black or brown hair like wet rope, a face that looked wrong, and a scream that people who heard it described the same way, like a woman being killed, far enough away that you couldn't help, close enough that you could hear every breath. The first confirmed death was the logger in the creek. He had gone up the mountain alone, hunting. When he didn't come back, a search party went looking. They found him in a stream a few miles from the village. His head wasn't cut, it wasn't torn, it was pressed, crushed downward into the gravel like something 3 times his weight had put its foot on it. A bear kills by slashing. A mountain lion kills by choking. Nothing in Alaska kills by stepping on a man's skull until the skull is flat. The men who carried his body home stopped walking alone in the woods that week. Then the bodies started showing up in the lagoon. Fishermen first. They'd leave in the morning and they wouldn't come back, and 3 or 4 days later the tide would bring them in. Face down, bloated, and every one of them the same way, with injuries to the head that didn't match the water. One man had his skull split clean from the crown to the jaw. Another was missing everything above the collar. The coroner in Seward wrote one word on the death certificates, over and over: drowning. The men pulling those bodies out of the water knew that wasn't true. They could see it wasn't true, but they were alone, and they were afraid, and they signed the paperwork. In the late 40s, a captain named Tom Larson pulled his boat into the cove at dusk to wait out weather. He told the story for the rest of his life. He said he saw something walk out of the tree line and into the shallows of the lagoon. Not a bear, not a man, 8 feet tall, arms that hung past its knees, shoulders wider than the doorway of his wheelhouse. He fired his rifle into it 3 times. It turned, looked directly at him, and walked back into the woods as if nothing had happened. He spent the rest of the night with his engine running. When he got back to Seward, he said 2 things. He was never going back to Portlock. And if anyone else with sense listened to him, neither would they. In 1949, the villagers called a meeting. not to plan, to decide. Every family that was left stood up and said the same thing. They weren't sleeping. Their children were being kept inside at night. The woods behind the houses were not safe anymore. Anyone who went out alone for firewood or water or a short walk to the outhouse didn't always come back. The official minutes don't exist. The paperwork, whatever there was of it, says the town closed because the fishery went quiet. The people who were there said the fishery was fine. The woods weren't. They didn't tear the buildings down. They didn't sell them. They didn't pack properly. When researchers and kayakers finally started going back in, decades later, they found the houses exactly as they'd been left. Dishes on tables, beds made, a child's shoe on the porch of one of the last occupied homes. Nobody ever came back for any of it. People who leave a place on purpose do not leave it like that. People who leave a place on purpose take their photographs off the wall. The Portlock houses still had photographs on the walls. They just didn't have people. Portlock is still there. You can fly in, you can kayak in from Seldovia. Every few years, a hunter or a documentary crew or a group of kayakers spends a night in the cove, and they come back with the same report. Screams from across the water, heavy movement on the ridge above the lagoon, trail cameras that capture nothing over and over until one frame where something tall is standing right in front of the lens. Recordings of breathing that shouldn't be human. The Forestry Service doesn't comment. The state troopers don't comment. Every pilot who flies out of Homer knows someone who doesn't land at Portlock anymore. The state of Alaska still lists Portlock as abandoned. That is the full explanation on the record. A village on a good cove with a working cannery that survived for thousands of years decided one winter to pack up and leave, and nobody has ever put a family back there. The bodies with crushed skulls are in the paperwork. The tracks that were neither bear nor boot are in the paperwork. The captain who emptied his rifle into something that didn't flinch is in the paperwork. And 16,000 people have gone missing inside the Alaska Triangle since. You tell us what's living in those woods, because the people who knew already moved. 16,000 people have disappeared in the Alaska Triangle since 1988. Hunters, bush pilots, entire families. The state stopped trying to explain the pattern years ago. The next file is the pattern. Subscribe so you don't miss it.